Welcome to Filmscore Fantastic, the podcast that takes you on a magical, thrilling, and sometimes emotional journey through the world of film, television, video game, and theme park music, presented to you by the Knittel Imaginarium. I am your host, Chris Knittel, and I am excited to be back to relaunch the series. We have a bunch of exciting shows to share with you in the near future. For our return, we want to go all the way back to the beginning. For today's show, we want to take you on a historical journey of the film score. Answer questions like, what is a film score? What are the origins of the film score? What is the process of creating a film score? And along the way, we'll have some fun surprises. So if you're ready, buckle up those safety restraints. Keep all hands, arms, and legs inside of our vehicle as we start our journey into the film score. Welcome back to part 3 of the history of the film score. For this episode, we will focus on the 1970s and the rise of synthesizers, funk, and film music innovation. The 1970s marked a seismic shift in the landscape of film music, one that was shaped by the emergence and rapid development of electronic technology. In this decade, synthesizers and other electronic instruments began to establish themselves as powerful tools for filmmakers, allowing them to explore new sonic territories that were previously unattainable with traditional orchestral instruments. At the core of this transformation was the fusion of electronic sounds with established forms of musical composition. The integration of synthesizers into film scores allowed composers to enhance the emotional impact of their music while also providing filmmakers with the ability to create entirely new soundscapes. These synthetic sounds were particularly suited to genres like science fiction, horror, and thrillers, where the exploration of the unknown, the alien, or the supernatural required sounds that went beyond the limitations of conventional instruments. Before the 1970s, the dominant language of film scoring had been orchestral. While composers had experimented with unconventional instruments, the orchestra remained the backbone of nearly every film score. Electronic music, on the other hand, was a relatively new frontier in the world of film scoring. The use of electronic devices to generate sound was not only groundbreaking, but also a reflection of broader technological advances in the post-war era. The 1970s, however, were the decade when electronic music began to truly break through. Composers like Wendy, whose work on Switched on Bach from 1968 and A Clockwork Orange from 1971 brought synthesizers into the mainstream and showed how these instruments could be used not just for experimental purposes, but as a serious compositional tool. Alongside Carlos, pioneers like Louis and Bebe Barron, who created the first entirely electronic score for Forbidden Planet from 1956, and John Carpenter, who crafted minimalist synthesizer-driven scores for his films, such as Dark Star from 1974, embraced the synthesizer's unique ability to convey emotion, tension, and otherworldliness. This transition from traditional to electronic scores also coincided with the rise of DIY culture, as synthesizers became more affordable and accessible. The production of music no longer required large orchestras or expensive studio time, making it easier for independent filmmakers to incorporate complex electronic soundtracks into their work. This democratization of music production also meant that filmmakers had greater control over the mood and atmosphere of their films. Perhaps one of the most significant aspects of the 1970s was the emotional resonance that these electronical scores could achieve. The sounds of the synthesizers, with their deep, pulsating basses, eerie warbles, and otherworldly tones, became synonymous with futuristic, dystopian, and psychological narratives. The new technology allowed composers to step outside the traditional confines of orchestral music, creating soundtracks that were as innovative and experimental as the films they accompanied. By the end of the decade, electronic music had firmly established its place in the world of film scoring. The sounds of the 1970s, synthesizers, theremins, and electronic tonalities became integral to the visual and emotional fabric of many films, and their influence would continue to reverberate throughout the following decades. These innovations opened new possibilities for film composers and forever changed the way we think about music in cinema. Before we jump into some of these groundbreaking and influential electronic scores of the 1970s, let's briefly explore electronic music and how it came to be used in film scoring. Electronics were first introduced to the film score by way of an unusual instrument called the theremin. The theremin is a remarkable and unique instrument, one of the first electronic devices ever used in film scoring. Unlike any other instrument, the theremin is played without physical contact. Instead of pressing keys or strumming strings, the performer manipulates the sound through hand gestures, controlling pitch and volume by moving their hands near two metal antennas. One antenna controls the pitch, which is the height of the sound. The other controls the volume, which is the loudness. As the performer moves closer to one antenna or further away from the other, they can change the sound's tone, creating an eerie and often unsettling effect. This distinctive feature gives the theremin an otherworldly, ghostly sound, making it a perfect match for science fiction, horror, and psychological thriller genres. In fact, the theremin became inextricably linked to the alien soundscape of many early films, where strange and supernatural elements were central to the story. Now, the theremin was invented by a Russian physicist named Leon Theremin in the 1920s. Initially, it was not conceived as a musical instrument, but rather a scientific device designed as a proximity sensor. Theremin, who was a brilliant inventor, developed the instrument as part of Soviet research into electronical engineering and surveillance technology. The idea was to create a machine that could detect the presence of object or people without physical contact. Little did anyone know that this proximity detector would eventually change the world of music forever. Leon Theremin introduced his invention to Western audiences in the late 1920s, but it was soon appropriated by composers, filmmakers, and experimental musicians. Theremin's personal story adds another layer of intrigue to the legacy of this instrument. Though the theremin was initially embraced in the West, its inventor was not destined to remain a free man. In the early 1930s, Leon Theremin found himself ensnared in political turmoil of the Soviet Union. Accused of espionage and conducting activities that were deemed suspicious by Stalin's regime, Theremin was arrested, kidnapped from his home in New York City, and sent to a Soviet labor camp. While working in harsh conditions, Theremin's remarkable skills as an inventor were put to use on top-secret Soviet projects, including the development of electronic eavesdropping equipment. It wasn't until decades later that he would return to the West, having suffered years of political persecution. His remarkable journey, both as a scientist and as a man, has become part of the mythos surrounding the theremin, adding to its air of mystery and fascination. The theremin's introduction to cinema is a fascinating story of how innovation in music matched the cultural mood of the times. One of its most iconic uses came in 1951 with the release of The Day the Earth Stood Still, a groundbreaking science fiction film directed by Robert Wise. The Day the Earth Stood Still follows Klaatu, an alien messenger, and his robot Gort, who arrive on Earth to warn against humanity's violent ways. Disguised as a human, Klaatu witnesses Earth's potential and issues an ultimatum: embrace peace or face annihilation by an interstellar alliance. Known for its Cold War message and timeless critique of humanity, the film is a science fiction classic. Bernard Herrmann, a composer known for his innovative film scores, used the theremin extensively to underscore the film's sense of alienation and fear of the unknown. The theremin's strange, wavering tones perfectly embodied the extraterrestrial beings and otherworldly events depicted on screen. The sound of the theremin became inseparable from the genre of science fiction, cementing its place in the sonic vocabulary of film music. Let's take a moment to listen to one of the most iconic uses of the theremin from Bernard Herrmann's score for the 1951 film The Day the Earth Stood Still. We'll listen to Prelude in Outer Space, where the theremin takes center stage, creating an eerie and unsettling atmosphere that perfectly matches the film's depiction of man's first encounter with extraterrestrial life. The theremin also made its mark in an earlier film, Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound from 1945, where it was used to evoke psychological tension and unease. Composed by Miklos Rosa, the score for Spellbound used the theremin to reflect the disturbed mental state of its main character, contributing to the film's surreal and disorienting atmosphere. While The Day the Earth Stood Still introduced the theremin as the sound of aliens, Spellbound demonstrated its versatility by using it to explore the complexities of the human mind. The theremin's influence on film scoring cannot be overstated. Its unique, haunting sound became a hallmark of the science fiction and horror genres. In The Day the Earth Stood Still and Spellbound, it defined the sonic identity of the films, contributing to the sense of mystery, fear, and the unknown. As we move forward, we will see how the theremin laid the groundwork for the broader use of synthesizers in film, setting the stage for the electronic soundtracks that defined the 1970s and beyond. The next milestone came to us with the release of the 1956 film Forbidden Planet. Forbidden Planet is a science fiction classic that stands out for its groundbreaking visuals, ambitious narrative, and most notably, its revolutionary use of electronic music. Directed by Fred M. Wilcox and produced by MGM, the film tells the story of a space expedition that lands on a distant planet, Altair 4, where they encounter a scientist, Dr. Morbius, and his daughter, who are the last survivors of a once thriving colony. As the plot unfolds, the crew uncovers mysterious forces at play, including the remnants of an advanced alien civilization and the threat of a dangerous, unknown entity that threatens their lives. What made Forbidden Planet particularly notable was not just its story or effects, but the way it used sound. In a time when orchestral scores dominated film music, Forbidden Planet broke new ground by featuring the first entirely electronic film score created by the husband and wife duo Louis and Bebe Barron. The music they crafted was not just a departure from tradition, it was a glimpse into the future of film scoring, blending sound design and music in ways that had never been heard before. Louis and Bebe Barron were relatively unknown at the time, but they were pioneers in the field of electronic music. They had spent years experimenting with sound in unconventional ways, far from the world of traditional music composition. Their background in musique concrète, a form of experimental music that uses recorded sounds as raw material, gave them the creative freedom to experiment in new and exciting ways. Forbidden Planet became the perfect canvas for their innovations. Louis, a self-taught engineer, constructed custom-built electronic circuits, oscillators, and feedback loops, while Bebe was heavily involved in manipulating the sound on tape, creating textures and atmosphere. Together, they created a score that was far cry from anything audiences had ever heard before. Forbidden Planet was not just the first film to feature an all-electronic score, it was a transformative moment in film music history. The process the Barrons used to create the score was as unconventional as the music itself. Unlike traditional composers who would work with orchestras, Louis and Bebe Barron worked entirely with machines and tape recorders to craft their sounds. They used a combination of oscillators, devices that generate electronic signals, and custom-built circuits to create sound waves. These oscillators produced pure tones, which the Barrons then manipulated using a variety of techniques including tape loops, reverb, delay, and other effects. In the world of film scoring, sound was generally understood in terms of instruments with fixed timbres, strings, brass, woodwinds, etc. The Barrons, however, had no such limitations. Their sounds were created from scratch, made by electronics rather than traditional instruments. The result was a series of tones that were radically different from anything the audience had ever heard before. It was eerie, alien, and unsettling, a perfect fit for the science fiction world of Forbidden Planet. This was a bold approach to film scoring. While other composers were still using traditional orchestras, the Barrons worked in the realm of abstraction, creating sound environments that went beyond the traditional structure of melody and harmony. Their score reflected the futuristic, otherworldly setting of the film, but also embraced a new form of musical expression that defied genre conventions. This technology was cutting edge for the time, and in many ways, the Barrons' work was ahead of its time. They had to invent much of the technology themselves. There were no synthesizers or samplers like we have today. Every sound was manually generated and manipulated, which gave their music a raw, primal quality that matched the themes of Forbidden Planet. The result was a soundtrack that sounded like no other, electronic tones that conveyed the terror and mystery of space in a way that orchestral music simply couldn't. The impact of the Barrons' score on the world of film music cannot be overstated. Forbidden Planet set a precedent for the use of electronic music in science fiction, showing filmmakers and composers alike that electronics could be used to evoke the unknown, to convey alien worlds, and to create atmospheres that went beyond the capabilities of traditional orchestras. The film score was an essential part of what made the film so innovative and successful, helping to establish a new aesthetic for science fiction cinema. The use of electronics to represent alien worlds, strange environments, and futuristic technology would become a hallmark of the genre, and Forbidden Planet is often cited as the first and most important film to use an entirely electronic score. While the Barrons' work was not immediately recognized or appreciated by the mainstream film industry, over time it has become widely acknowledged as one of the most innovative and influential film scores in history. Let's take a moment to listen to an excerpt from the score Forbidden Planet. As you listen, pay attention to the raw electronic sound design, the synthetic tones that evoke the mysterious, alien world of Altair 4. Despite its groundbreaking nature, the Barons' contribution to Forbidden Planet was not fully appreciated in their time. One of the key issues was their lack of membership in the American Federation of Musicians, which led to a controversy over their credits for the film. Because the Barons weren't recognized as official musicians by the union, MGM was forced to credit their work not as electronic music, but as electronic tonalities. This unfortunate labeling further marginalized their work and denied them the recognition they deserved. Sadly, the Barons never received the credit they were due during their careers. They were innovative pioneers, but their contributions to the world of film scoring were often overlooked or misunderstood by the mainstream film industry. In the years following the release of Forbidden Planet, the Barons continued to experiment and work on smaller projects, but their innovative methods were largely left behind in favor of more traditional scoring techniques. However, the Barons' legacy has grown over time. Today, Forbidden Planet and its score are widely regarded as one of the most important milestones in the history of film music. Louis and Bebe Barron's pioneering work helped to pave the way for the use of electronic music in film, and their contributions are now celebrated as integral to the evolution of modern film scoring. Their work has inspired countless composers and filmmakers, and Forbidden Planet remains a testament to the power of innovation in film music. The groundbreaking electronic score of Forbidden Planet marked a bold leap in film music, using experimental techniques and custom-built circuits to create a soundscape unlike anything audiences had ever heard. This pioneering approach opened the door for electronic music to move beyond the avant-garde and into mainstream recognition. Over a decade later, Wendy Carlos's Switched on Bach from 1968 would further revolutionize perceptions of electronic music. By reinterpreting classical compositions on the Moog synthesizer, Carlos demonstrated the instrument's expressive potential, bridging the gap between experimental electronic soundscapes like those in Forbidden Planet and the broader acceptance of synthesizers in both film and music. Wendy Carlos, born in 1939, is one of the most influential figures in the history of electronic music. A classically trained musician, Carlos began her career with a deep understanding of traditional music theory and composition. She attended Brown University and later studied at Columbia University, where she was exposed to early forms of electronic music. Carlos's musical journey, however, took a significant turn when she became fascinated by the possibilities offered by new electronic instruments. It was during this time that she met Bob Moog, the inventor of the Moog synthesizer, one of the earliest and most influential synthesizers. Carlos's collaboration with Moog was pivotal. She was not only a talented composer, but also had an intuitive understanding of how to harness the potential of these new machines. With Moog's synthesizers in hand, Carlos began experimenting with new sound textures and creating compositions that combined traditional and electronic music. It was in 1968 Wendy Carlos released Switched on Bach, an album that would change the way the world thought about electronic music. The album featured synthesizer renditions of Johann Sebastian Bach's works, an audacious and innovative project that showcased the Moog's synthesizer capabilities. By taking the well-known compositions of Bach and arranging them on an electronic instrument, Carlos bridged the gap between the worlds of classical music and electronic music. Switched on Bach became a huge commercial success, reaching mainstream audiences and winning 3 Grammy Awards. It was the first time a synthesizer had been used in a classical setting to such acclaim. The album's success was a turning point for the synthesizer, showing that electronic music could be taken seriously and even enjoyed in traditional musical settings. This achievement helped change public perceptions of electronic music, which had largely been viewed as avant-garde or experimental. Wendy Carlos's groundbreaking work on Switched on Bach was one of the earliest instances of synthesizers making their way into mainstream music culture. Let's give this groundbreaking work a listen. We'll hear Johann Sebastian Bach's Sinfonia to Cantata, reimagined by Wendy Carlos on the groundbreaking Switched on Bach album, from 1968. In the early 1970s, Stanley Kubrick, the director of iconic films such as 2001: A Space Odyssey from 1968, was working on a new project called A Clockwork Orange, a dark and dystopian film based on the novel by Anthony Burgess. The film, dealing with themes of free will, violence, and social control, required a score that would reflect its disturbing and controversial imagery. Kubrick had a reputation for being meticulous and for choosing his collaborators carefully. He was already known for his innovative use of music in films, and for A Clockwork Orange, he wanted a score that would enhance the film's tension and emotional impact. Having heard Wendy Carlos's work on Switched on Bach, Kubrick reached out to her to compose the score for the film. What followed was a collaboration that would forever change the landscape of film scoring. Carlos was initially unsure of how her electronic music would complement the complex emotions and brutal violence of the film. However, Kubrick trusted her vision, and soon Carlos was working on the project. One of the most pivotal moments in this collaboration came when Wendy Carlos sent Kubrick a demo recording of a piece she had been composing called Time Steps. The piece was a sophisticated and haunting example of what could be done with synthesizers, combining classical influences with new electronic textures. Kubrick was immediately taken by the piece, and it became part of the film's soundtrack. The synthesized sound of time steps was both unsettling and beautiful, much like the world Kubrick had depicted in A Clockwork Orange. The combination of Carlos's electronic interpretation of classical music and Kubrick's disturbing imagery created a unique synergy that is still celebrated today. Carlos also reinterpreted other classical pieces for the film, including versions of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and Purcell's Music for the Funeral of Queen Mary. These pieces were not just covers, but innovative reimaginings of these iconic works, infused with electronic textures that added new layers of emotion and atmosphere to the film. In fact, Carlos's synthesized renditions of Beethoven's Ode to Joy became synonymous with the film's iconic imagery, bringing a sense of eerie triumph to the film's violence and unsettling moments. Let's take a moment to listen to a couple of pieces from Wendy Carlos's synthesized score to the 1971 film A Clockwork Orange. First, we'll hear Music for the Funeral of Queen Mary, and then the cue Biblical Daydreams. As you listen, pay attention to how Carlos transforms this classical piece into something entirely new. Wendy Carlos's work on A Clockwork Orange was not simply a case of replacing traditional instruments with synthesizers. Her approach was far more nuanced and innovative. She used the synthesizers not only as a tool for replicating traditional instruments, but as a means to create entirely new sound worlds. In doing so, she redefined the boundaries between classical music, electronic music, and avant-garde experimentation. Her score for A Clockwork Orange blurred the lines between the familiar and the alien. Carlos used the Moog synthesizer to create lush, sweeping tones, but she also pushed the instrument to produce harsh, jagged, and dissonant sounds. The result was a score that both evoked the classical tradition while simultaneously creating a soundscape that was entirely modern and unsettling, perfect for Kubrick's vision. Carlos's work in A Clockwork Orange demonstrated that synthesizers could be used to create emotionally charged and dramatic scores, not just cold or mechanical sounds. She was able to evoke tension, beauty, chaos, and calm using a combination of classical references and avant-garde techniques. The long-term influence of A Clockwork Orange on film music is immeasurable. Wendy Carlos proved that synthesizers could create both familiar, emotionally resonant music and entirely new futuristic textures. Her ability to weave these two elements together revolutionized the way electronic music was used in cinema. In the years that followed, composers like Vangelis, Giorgio Moroder, and John Carpenter would take inspiration from Carlos's work. Carlos also demonstrated how synthesizers could blend with other technologies and genres, paving the way for composers to experiment freely and to use electronic music in ways that were previously unimaginable. While not from the 1970s, let's give a brief listen to Wendy Carlos's groundbreaking work on the 1982 film Tron. This landmark movie by Walt Disney was one of the first to extensively use computer-generated imagery, immersing audiences in a futuristic digital world. Wendy Carlos's innovative score blends traditional orchestration with pioneering electronic elements, perfectly capturing the film's high-tech aesthetic. We'll hear two standout cues, Tron Scherzo and the majestic end titles. Wendy Carlos's contributions to film music and electronic music cannot be overstated. She helped to normalize the use of synthesizers in mainstream films, showing filmmakers that electronics could provide not just sound effects, but deeply emotional and powerful music. Her work paved the way for future composers, and even composers in the video game industry, all of whom have incorporated synthesizers into their scores in innovative ways. In addition to her role in advancing the use of synthesizers in film, Carlos was also one of the first composers to use the Moog synthesizer for an entire film score. Her technical achievements were groundbreaking, and she played a key role in the development of synthesizers for musical purposes. Through her work, Carlos helped to transform the role of electronic music in film, turning it from a niche experiment to a key part of the cinematic language. The 1970s marked a turning point in film scoring, as electronic music began to gain significant ground in mainstream cinema. Building on the groundbreaking innovations of the theremin, the experimental electronic score for Forbidden Planet, and Wendy Carlos's considerable contributions, filmmakers in the 1970s increasingly turned to synthesizers to shape the sound of their films. The appeal of synthesizers was clear. They could create a range of sounds that traditional orchestral instruments simply could not match, offering a level of flexibility, control, and innovation that was previously unimaginable in film scoring. John Carpenter was one of the most influential filmmakers to use synthesizers in his scores, and his early works in the 1970s, particularly Dark Star from 1974 and Assault on Precinct 13 from 1976, showcases his innovative use of electronic music to define the tone and atmosphere of his films. Both of these films not only helped shape Carpenter's signature style, but also played a key role in the development of synthesizer-driven film scores in the 1970s, influencing countless filmmakers and composers in the years that followed. Dark Star is a science fiction film that began as a student project at the University of Southern California before being expanded into a feature-length film. Directed by John Carpenter, this low-budget film about a crew of astronauts stranded in deep space has since become a cult classic. Its unique blend of absurdist humor, existential themes, and minimalist production design set it apart from many mainstream science fiction films of the time. One of the key elements that contributed to the film's distinctiveness was its score. Carpenter, who had been learning music on his own, composed the entire soundtrack. Lacking a large budget, he turned to the emerging world of synthesizers to create the film's atmospheric and otherworldly sound. Carpenter uses the EMS VCS3, a synthesizer known for its versatility in creating abstract, experimental sounds. The use of this synthesizer gave the film's score an eerie, almost desolate quality, which was perfect for capturing the cold emptiness of space. Carpenter's minimalist approach to the score reinforced the film's themes of isolation and the vast, unknowable nature of space. The soundtrack's repetitive, drone-like motifs echoed the monotonous routine of the astronauts' lives, while sporadic bursts of sound added a sense of unpredictability, creating tension without the need for traditional orchestral flourishes. The synth-driven score was a stark contrast to the lush, symphonic music typically associated with space films of the era, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and instead it evoked a sense of bleakness and loneliness. The innovative use of synthesizers in Dark Star marked a turning point in Carpenter's career and in film scoring as a whole. The success of the film's score demonstrated the potential of electronic music to create unique soundscapes that went beyond traditional film music conventions. The film's minimalist electronic sound would set the stage for Carpenter's later works, influencing his approach to scoring his future films, particularly in the horror genre. Let's take a moment to listen to an excerpt from Dark Star from 1974, where Carpenter's minimalistic approach to synthesizer-driven music helped create an eerie, atmospheric backdrop for this low-budget science fiction film. The hypnotic, repetitive tones will take us into the cold, isolated world of space. Of note, this is a pretty rough recording. There was never an official score released. What we have here is pulled from a set that was released that has dialogue and sound effects included, but you'll get a good idea of what Carpenter was working towards. Years after Dark Star in 1976, Carpenter released Assault on Precinct 13, a gritty action thriller that blended elements of westerns and urban crime films. The story follows a group of police officers and civilians who must defend themselves against a ruthless gang of killers after they are trapped in a soon-to-be-shut-down precinct in a decaying part of the city. Like Dark Star, Carpenter turned to synthesizers to create the film's score, but Assault on Precinct 13 marked a shift in tone. The score for this film was far more intense and menacing, reflecting the heightened stakes and violent atmosphere of the story. Carpenter used a combination of synthesizers to create a driving, pulsating rhythm, which gave the film a constant sense of tension. The main theme, which would go on to become iconic, was composed using a synthesizer bass line that repeated in a hypnotic and ominous manner, underscoring the relentless pursuit of the characters by the gang. Carpenter's use of synthesizers in Assault on Precinct 13 was ahead of its time, creating a sound that was both electronic and gritty, fitting the film's urban setting and its low-budget indie spirit. The synthesizers provided a stark contrast to the conventional orchestral scores typically of action films, giving the film a modern, raw edge. The pulsating electronic rhythms in Assault on Precinct 13 would go on to influence many future scores, especially in the genres of horror, thriller, and action, where Carpenter's minimalist and tension-building style became a template. The score also showcased Carpenter's innovative use of the synthesizer as a tool for creating emotional resonance. Rather than relying on complex orchestral arrangements to elicit fear, excitement, or sadness, Carpenter used the simplicity and raw power of the synthesizer tones to convey a range of emotions. The synthesizer, in his hands, became a tool for building atmosphere, intensifying the horror and danger that his characters faced. Let's listen to the main titles from Assault on Precinct 13 from 1976, where Carpenter's use of synthesizers became darker and more intense. This score, known for its pulsing rhythms and haunting melodies, perfectly complements the gritty urban setting of the film, adding tension and unease as the characters face relentless danger. These two pieces showcase Carpenter's pioneering work in electronic film scoring, demonstrating how synthesizers could create powerful atmospheres and emotional resonance with just a few simple tones. The success of Dark Star and Assault on Precinct 13 helped establish John Carpenter as a master of film scoring, particularly for low-budget independent films. His use of synthesizers not only made his films unique, but also helped popularize the idea that electronic music could be a viable and powerful tool for filmmakers working within limited budgets. Carpenter's minimalist electronic scores for these early films set the stage for his iconic works in the horror genre, particularly Halloween from 1978, where the use of synthesizers became even more central to the atmosphere and storytelling. While electronic scores like those from Forbidden Planet, A Clockwork Orange, and John Carpenter's films pushed the boundaries of film music with their experimental use of synthesizers and unconventional soundscapes, the 1970s also saw a parallel revolution in other genres, particularly in blaxploitation cinema. The music in these films, characterized by the soulful rhythms of Isaac Hayes and Curtis Mayfield, took a completely different approach but was no less innovative. Where electronic scores use futuristic sounds to explore outer space and dystopian futures, blaxploitation scores grounded their sonic identity in the funk and soul music of the era, drawing deeply from African American cultural movements. Both trends, though distinct in sound, shared a boldness and willingness to break away from traditional orchestral scores, using music not just as a backdrop, but as a driving force in shaping the narrative and emotional core of the films. The crossover of these diverse styles, from the mechanical, otherworldly tones of the synthesizers to the raw, rhythmic grooves of funk, helped to redefine the role of music in cinema during the 1970s, giving filmmakers new ways to communicate emotion, atmosphere, and identity through sound. Blaxploitation films, which emerged in the early 1970s, were groundbreaking for their portrayal of African American characters in both heroic and complex roles, often set against gritty urban backdrops. These films, such as Shaft from 1971, Superfly from 1972, and Foxy Brown from 1974, became immensely popular, bringing African American culture into the mainstream. But it wasn't just the characters and storylines that made these films stand out. The music played a pivotal role in defining the tone, mood, and identity of the genre. The music in blaxploitation films was more than just a soundtrack. It was a character in itself, setting the scene and adding emotional depth to the stories. The genre's sound, which was a fusion of jazz, funk, soul, and R&B, perfectly reflected the cultural energy of the time. These films embraced the idea that music should be just as bold, brash, and dynamic as the characters they depicted. The soundtracks were often as iconic as the films themselves, helping to shape the image of Black empowerment and rebellion. A few composers became synonymous with the blaxploitation genre. One of the most important was Isaac Hayes, whose groundbreaking score for Shaft from 1971 remains one of the most recognizable in film history. With its smooth, funky melodies and swaggering brass, Shaft became the blueprint for many scores that followed, blending jazz, soul, and funk to create a sound that was both cinematic and anthemic. Hayes' use of orchestration with funky rhythms and groove-heavy bass lines made the soundtrack feel larger than life, perfectly matching the film's tough hero, private detective John Shaft. Another key figure was Curtis Mayfield, whose score for Superfly from 1972 was a perfect match for the film's portrayal of inner-city life and the moral complexity of its protagonist, Youngblood Priest. Mayfield's soul, atmospheric music, with its sweeping strings and laid-back grooves, elevated Superfly into a cultural touchstone. His music for Superfly still resonates today, as it not only defined the sound of the era, but also captured the spirit of urban rebellion and self-determination. Listening to these soundtracks today, it's clear how revolutionary they were, not just for film music, but for the music industry at large. They blended commercial appeal with artistic innovation, laying the groundwork for future composers and influencing countless filmmakers and musicians. Let's take a moment to experience a couple of key tracks from the blaxploitation era. First, we'll listen to the iconic theme from Shaft by Isaac Hayes as part of a 10-minute suite, which became the anthem of the genre. Its confident, soulful sound still defines the image of the cool, heroic anti-hero at the heart of these films. Here is the theme from Shaft, Ellie's love theme, Shaft's cab ride, and the end themes from the 1971 film Shaft, composed by Isaac Hayes.
dick that's a sex machine to all the chicks. You're damn right. Who is the man that would risk his neck for his brother, man? Can you dig it? Who's the cat that won't come out when there's danger all about? Right on. They say this cat Shaft is a bad mother. I'm talking about Shaft. He's a complicated man, but no one understands him but his woman.
Next, we'll listen to an 11-minute suite from Curtis Mayfield's Superfly, which beautifully encapsulates the atmosphere of the film with its lush orchestration and funky rhythm. Mayfield's score was groundbreaking not only for its rich musical textures, but for its subtle commentary on urban life and the pursuit of the American dream. Here is Superfly, Think, Chase, and Eddie You Should Know Better from the 1972 film Superfly, composed by Curtis Mayfield.
There's a set going strong, a lot of things going on. The man of the hour has an air of great power. The dudes have envied him for so long. Oh, Superfly, you're gonna make your fortune by and by. But if you lose, don't ask no questions why. The only game you know is do or die. Hard to understand. What a hell of a man. This cat of the slum had a mind, wasn't dumb. But a weakness was shown, cause his hustle was wrong. His mind was his own, but the man lived alone. Ooh, Superfly, you're gonna make your fortune by and by. But if you lose, don't ask no questions why. The only game you know is do or die. The game he plays for keys. Hustling times in ghetto streets, trying to get over. That's what he's trying to do, y'all. Taking all that he can take, gambling with the odds of fate, trying to get over, trying to get over. Trying to get over. Ooh, Superfly. The aim of his role was to move a lot of blow. Ask him his dream, what does it mean? He wouldn't know. Can't be like the rest, it's the most he'll confess. But the time's running out and there's no happiness. Ooh, Superfly, you're gonna make your fortune by and by. But if you lose, don't ask no questions why. The only game you know is do or die. Superfly. But sometimes you wonder now and then, the only time he chooses you when there's something to lose through his personal loss, and the friend pays the cost all the time. Must be something that's freezing his mind that has made him through grief so very blind, and I don't think he's gonna make it this time.
These tracks exemplify how music in blaxploitation films was an essential element of storytelling, elevating the emotional depth of the films while also helping to define the cultural movement of the 1970s. By incorporating the music of these groundbreaking composers into the larger discussion of film scores, we can highlight the importance of how music in the 1970s reflected and amplified the social and cultural changes of the time. The fusion of different musical genres with cinematic storytelling helped set the stage for the future of film music, proving that the right score could not only elevate a film, but also change the cultural landscape. Blaxploitation films hold a special place in my heart, not just for their bold storytelling and iconic characters, but for their groundbreaking music, which remains some of my favorites to this day. The funk and soul-infused soundtracks by artists like Isaac Hayes, Curtis Mayfield, and James Brown provided a rich emotional layer to these films, perfectly capturing their raw energy and themes of empowerment. What's remarkable is how this musical legacy continues to resonate in modern media, such as Marvel's Luke Cage series, which masterfully blends the gritty, urban vibe of blaxploitation with contemporary storytelling. The series pays homage to the genre with its soundtrack featuring artists like Adrian Young and Ali Shaheed Muhammad, echoing the soulful power of the 1970s while introducing a new generation to this iconic style. As we've seen, the 1970s marked a transformative period in film scoring, with electronic music and genre-defining scores reshaping the landscape of cinema. However, we are far from finished exploring the full scope of the 1970s film music. While synthesizers and funk grooves took center stage, the classical orchestral film score was still alive, though barely hanging on by a thread. The golden age of Hollywood scoring may have been in its twilight, but it was about to be resurrected in a way that no one could have predicted. A film that takes place in a galaxy far, far away would redefine the relationship between music and film for generations to come. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Film Score Fantastic. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating world of the early 1970s film scores with me, but don't stop here. Make sure to join us next time for an exciting episode you won't want to miss. If you loved the music you heard today, remember you can support the artists and composers by purchasing their work. Links to all the featured tracks will be available in the show's notes. Until then, keep listening, keep learning, and keep loving the music that brings movies to life. See you next time.